Okay, and so what this software does is it basically just records a screen capture of whatever's going to be on my screen. It also records my voice. Thankfully, it doesn't record a video of me, so I can make funny faces at the computer screen and it's not going to be on record. But hopefully it'll record my voice, and usually can kind of pick up people in the room too, so if somebody asks a question, it'll show up on the video as well. So like I said, every day I'll post these on YouTube, and you guys can watch them, you know, if you're working on your homework, trying to get caught up, whatever. However, I will say that just because I'm posting the lectures doesn't mean I don't expect you. I always expect you to come to class. So there will be some days where, you know, if I'm writing on the board or something like that, it doesn't pick up my voice very well. I'm probably not going to be able to record all of that kind of stuff. So just because I'm recording stuff doesn't mean I don't expect you to be here. In fact, you know, participation is kind of a portion of your grade, and so if you're not here, you're going to lose out on some of those points. And you know, I don't think that the lecture videos are a substitute for actually attending lecture. So please make sure you're here every day. So what do we see here in MATLAB when we start it up? We've got this big window over on the right-hand side of my screen. This is what is called the command window in MATLAB. So this is where you tell MATLAB, you command MATLAB what to do. I had a professor when I was in college who called MATLAB the magic genie. So the magic genie is all powerful, except for it doesn't do anything until you tell the magic genie what wishes to grant you, right? You got to tell the magic genie what the 3 wishes are, and then it says, oh, sure, I can do all that kind of stuff. MATLAB's kind of like that. It's got all this powerful knowledge, but it doesn't do anything until you tell it what to do. So you've got to be able to command MATLAB to do the things that you want it to do, and we do that through the command window. So that's where we talk to MATLAB, it's through the command window. We've got a couple other things that are really important on your main screen here. We have this bar up here, which is called your path. So up there at the top, you've got your MATLAB path, or your current folder, or your current working directory, whatever kind of terminology that you want. By default, that's usually set to some sort of MATLAB folder that has been added to your computer by default. If you want, because this is probably your only class that you've got where you're writing MATLAB code right now, you can throw all your files, throw all your stuff that we're going to do for this class in that generic MATLAB folder. If you want to be a little more organized about it, you want to create a folder somewhere in your computer for computational methods for this semester, you know, you can do that and kind of save all that stuff there. It's totally up to you. Because I've got multiple MATLAB things going on, I always have kind of a specific folder for this specific class. And so if you want to change what's called your current working directory, or the location that MATLAB is going to be saving files in, accessing files from, you can change it a couple different ways. If you click into this bar up here at the top, if you've recently loaded that folder, you've got a list of things that have been recently loaded. If you just installed MATLAB, that's probably empty, or probably only has one thing in it. If you want to change that folder that you're located in, you can always go to Open File and Open File. You can always browse for the folder here and find where it's located. So right now I'm going to navigate to our class folder for this semester. That way I've got stuff, oops, I read the wrong one. That way I've got stuff all kind of organized and I don't get confused. So you can always change your current working directory. For right now, kind of this introductory stuff, it's not going to make a huge difference. Once we start writing our own MATLAB programs, the working directory that we're in is going to be a big deal. So we'll come back and kind of visit, you know, what do we do about the current working directory. So now you see up here at the top in the path, it's got this longer path name because I changed where my folder was located. Over here on the left in the current folder box, you can see any files that are in that folder. The ones that you could open in MATLAB, you could double click there and they'll open up in MATLAB. Like I said, once we get to writing our programs, that'll become a little more relevant. Down here on the bottom left, I've got 2 windows that are kind of on top of each other, one hidden behind the other. If you want to do something like that, you can right click down here. Oops, not right click. Let's see. They always change up how you lay out. So if you click on the layout button, you can choose to show any of these boxes. So you've got current folder, you've got workspace, you've got the panel title, shortcut tabs, tool strip, that's all the stuff up at the top. If you want to show your command history, you can have it either docked over there on the left, so that's where mine is, or you can have it as a pop-up, a separate window that will come up that'll be a separate MATLAB screen. You can kind of change these up. Like I said, it's really up to you how you set up your MATLAB window, whatever is kind of most pleasing to your own eye. What'll show up in the workspace are going to be all of the things we're going to create in MATLAB. That's kind of the working memory of MATLAB. And then the command history is really just like it says, a history of all the commands that you have put into the command window. If you just downloaded MATLAB for the first time, there's probably nothing there. But it will keep this command history. MATLAB will keep it forever and ever and ever. You can scroll back, I don't know, months and months and months as far as you want and find your old commands that you have. So we'll talk more about those different windows kind of as we move along today. So how do we command MATLAB, the MATLAB genie, to do things? We just type things into the command window. So MATLAB can be really powerful, or it can be a really fancy calculator. I mean, if you don't feel like lugging around your TI-89 calculator and you really like lugging around your laptop to everything, you can use MATLAB as a really fancy calculator. I mean, you could do, 55 minus 16. Voila, MATLAB can do that calculation, right? So it's really nice, really fancy, but that's probably not the primary reason you're going to use MATLAB, is to do simple calculations like that. It's a little heavy to lug around your laptop just to do 55 minus 16. So you'll see what happened when we did that. So we told MATLAB to take 55 and subtract off 16. What did we see that happened? So MATLAB gave us back the answer is 39. It also did what's called it created a variable. It created something called answer, and it set answer to be equal to 39. So we can see that in a couple different ways. So MATLAB reported back to us here in the command window, it said answer, ANS, is equal to 39. If we look over in our workspace, we also now have a variable called ANS that has the value of 39 in it. So if we are in our workspace, we can double click on these variables and MATLAB will open up kind of a variable window that kind of looks like an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. It's got that number in it. We could also edit things in there if we wanted to. So if I wanted to go in and now change this to be 50, MATLAB would change the value of answer to be equal to 50, something like that. So you can change variables quite a bit in MATLAB with different ways. And view the variables, that kind of thing. We'll do more of that throughout the semester. So you'll see that if we don't tell MATLAB where to store something, we don't say, hey, I want to create a variable, I want to call it X, and I want to save the value of 55 minus 16 or 39 into X, MATLAB comes up with this answer variable by default. So anything that I type into the command window, so if I were to type 4, MATLAB says now answer is equal to 4. So answer is kind of the default. You didn't do anything about it, so MATLAB's going to come up with something on its own for you. And it's really not that useful because now you see that we had answer was equal to 39. I changed it to 50, and now it became 4. MATLAB doesn't remember that it was 39 and that it was 50. It only keeps the most recent information in that answer variable. So usually we don't like to just let MATLAB pick what the name of the variable is. We don't like to use that answer variable because it's really not helpful. We usually like to name our variable something that makes sense, something that's useful to us, and something that we'll remember, and we don't have to kind of write over it, and we can keep that information in MATLAB as long as we want to. So usually we assign numbers to variables when we're dealing with stuff in MATLAB. And the way that we do this process called assignment is just by saying exactly what we would say. So if I wanted to create a variable called A, make it equal to 4, I would just type that into MATLAB. I would say A is equal to 4. I'd press enter, and again MATLAB reports back to me that it has set the variable A equal to 4. And then if I go over here in my workspace, you now see that I have A, it's equal to 4. So really easy, how do we create variables? We can do something like that. MATLAB doesn't really care if you have white space between the variables. So you'll see I did a equals to 4. I didn't put any spaces in there. I could have just as easily said, you know, a space 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 is equal to space 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 4. Same thing. MATLAB doesn't care. It pretty much ignores all that white space there. So if you feel like putting a lot of spaces in there, you're more than welcome to. You don't really need to unless you like it. So it's kind of up to your personal preference however you type things into MATLAB. For the most part, it's not picky about things like white space.
If you did a plus a and s right now, would it do it? Would it come out as a?
Let's try it. So if we did a plus a, right?
Or a plus a and s, since you have two variables.
Right, we could do the same thing. So we have a plus a, so now answer is equal to 8. We can also do a plus answer, and now we've got answer is equal to 12. So MATLAB has forgotten that answer was equal to 8. It's now equal to 12, right? So MATLAB, you know, doesn't really retain or doesn't really know that you're changing the values of variables. So that's something that you have to be aware of. So if you know, do a plus answer, or for example, if I were to now say, hey, I want to set a is equal to 6, it's going to replace that old value. It's going to get rid of it. It doesn't care. It doesn't warn you. So that's something you have to be aware of. If you command MATLAB to set a is equal to 6, MATLAB will do exactly what you have asked it to do. So it's not going to warn you or try to say, hey, you've already got an A. Maybe not. Maybe you don't want to do that. That's something that you have to remember to do, keep track of, that kind of thing. So what else is just kind of generic assignment rules? You can't have a variable with a number at the beginning of it. So if I were to try to create something like, I don't know, a variable that's called, I don't know, 12c, set that equal to 52, MATLAB's going to yell at me. You're going to become, I don't know, for better or worse, very well acquainted with the MATLAB errors. It makes this lovely little dinging noise. Everybody starts to hate it after a couple weeks. And then you get this nice red angry message that, you know, you've made MATLAB angry. And it tries for the most part to be helpful. It gives you an error message. Usually it's trying to help you figure out what you've done wrong. Here it says, you know, error, unexpected MATLAB expression, trying to tell you, hey, you might not have done something correctly. And it's trying to tell you that you can't start variables with a number. So all variables have to start with a letter. It can be uppercase or it can be lowercase. And MATLAB is case sensitive. So we already had lowercase a. If we create uppercase a and we set it equal to, I don't know, 12, you'll see that if we look over here in our workspace, we now have a little a and we have a big A. Those are two different values. MATLAB is case sensitive, so you've got to be careful with your, you know, capitalization of different variables. If you were to type something, MATLAB's going to think that those are two different things if you have different capitalization in your variable names. Variable names can be as long as you want. They don't have to be single letters. So, you know, you could create a variable called Bob and set it equal to, you know, 4 plus 1, for example. You don't even have to type the number. You can get MATLAB to do some math for you if you want to. So you can create variable names. It can be, I think there is a limit to how long the variable name can be, but it's something ridiculous like, I don't know, 50-something characters. You probably won't encounter that. But you can put, for the most part, letters and numbers. So if I wanted to have, you know, Bob2 and set that equal to, I don't know, 23, MATLAB's happy with that. So you can put letters, numbers. You can put some special characters like underscores, things like that in variable names as well. But for the most part, general rule is it has to start with a letter of some sort when you're creating a variable name. You can also, if you're tired of typing things into MATLAB and having MATLAB just report back to you that it set that variable equal to some sort of number, you can hide that output from MATLAB. So if I wanted to create, I don't know, x and set that equal to 43, if I don't want MATLAB to report back to me that it set x equal to 43, I'm confident that it did that okay, I can do what's called turning off the echo printing, which is to put a semicolon at the end. So if I put a semicolon at the end, I press enter, MATLAB's not going to report back to me that it set the variable, it assigned the value of 43 to x, but you can see that it did it. If you look over in the workspace, we now have x is equal to 43, right? So you don't always have to print things out to the screen. When we start writing our MATLAB programs that are going to be many lines long, it's not very pretty to have all that stuff printing out to the screen. So a lot of times we'll put semicolons at the end. So that's kind of the traditional way of programming, not just in MATLAB, but in a lot of different languages, is to put semicolons at the end of all your commands that you're giving the program so that it doesn't kind of report back to you that you've done something, because you've told it, you're pretty sure that MATLAB's doing what you think it is doing, so you don't need it to tell you that it did it as well. Let's see. So in addition to just dealing with numbers and variables and things like that, MATLAB has a lot of what are called built-in constants. So often in engineering, we need to use the value of pi. We don't need to remember the MATLAB, that pi has all the different numbers, 17 digits or whatever. MATLAB has that built in. So if we just type in pi into MATLAB, we press enter, MATLAB reports back to us that pi, up to 4 decimal places is 3.1416. MATLAB keeps around, I think, 16 decimal places after the decimal, so all that information is hidden around in MATLAB. By default, it's only going to print 4 out to the screen. There's all sorts of different ways to get MATLAB to print numbers to the screen, and so if you ever wanted to know how to do that, you can just kind of Google around, how to get MATLAB to print out more decimal places, that kind of thing. But like I said, all that information is floating around. MATLAB's got all that information in its memory. It just kind of shows you these 4 decimal places out to the screen. So what else could we know about MATLAB? So what other constants might we think MATLAB has? We don't have to memorize these things. All things about MATLAB we don't really have to memorize. MATLAB has fantastic help documentation, and I highly encourage you to become familiar with the help documentation. If you ask me, how to do something in MATLAB that I think you probably should already know, what am I going to tell you? Did you look in the help documentation? That's what I'm going to ask you. So make sure you look there. How do we do that? So how do we even find the help documentation? There's a couple different ways. By far the easiest way is up here on the top right of your screen. You should have a little search box that says search documentation. If I wanted to search the documentation about pi, I put pi in there, I press enter, and it's going to open up by default the help documentation. It's going to have a search list of all the different things that are related to pi. If I click on this first link here, I'm going to have the help documentation about the constant pi. It tells me what it is. Usually you get some sort of example that shows you how to use whatever that is in MATLAB, and it's really, just kind of helpful. The help is helpful in MATLAB, so use it as much as you can. You can see that once you look something up, so say pi, for example, you're going to get a grouping over here. MATLAB's got really nice kind of organization of other things that are related to pi. So you get all these other constants. So in MATLAB, by default, I is defined as an imaginary number. So you've got that in there. You've also got J. You've got all sorts of things built into MATLAB, and you can find all of that in the MATLAB help. This class is a brief introduction to MATLAB. There is absolutely no way that I could teach you everything about MATLAB. So one of the important skills that I hope you learn in this class is how to find things that I haven't taught you about MATLAB. So using the help documentation is kind of the easiest and simple way. Like I showed you, you can find it by putting stuff into the search up there. If you're in the command window and you don't want to, that's too far for you to move your mouse up there to the top right corner, you can also type in the word help, and you can type in whatever command it is you want to look up the help documentation about. So for example, pi, and you're going to get a nice short little description of that help documentation right there in your command window. If you want to know more information, you click on the doc link there, and it'll pull up that help documentation in a separate window again. So that's 2 different ways to access the help documentation. Where else could we possibly find some information about MATLAB? There's this magical invention called the internet, and lots of information about MATLAB is on the internet. And we can't always trust everything that we find on the internet, right? But for the most part, stuff you find about MATLAB on the internet usually pretty good. And so as our mechanical engineering department chair, Dr. Kissick, says, use the Google to find things. So if we go to your favorite, you don't have to use Google, but your favorite search engine, and we type in, MATLAB, let's say MATLAB constants. We want to say, like, what? I don't remember that MATLAB has pi or not, but I want to find some constant values in MATLAB. I Google MATLAB constants, and what comes up first? Some stuff from MathWorks, which are the people that make MATLAB, and lo and behold, it's the online version of the help documentation. So if you can't remember how to find the help documentation in MATLAB, you can always Google stuff, and usually the first couple things that will come up are the help documentation, the online version of that. And you'll also find other course websites, other information about MATLAB. So I highly encourage you, if you can't find something, if you can't remember what I said about it, or if it's something that we haven't had time to cover in this class, you want to figure out, hey, does MATLAB do this? Google it, figure it out. It's probably somewhere on the internet. So that's an important skill to gather in this class. Is just, like I said, I won't be able to teach you everything about MATLAB. We're only going to learn a small fraction of things, how to find other stuff about MATLAB besides what I tell you in this class. Okay, so any questions about anything we've covered so far? Not too scary yet, right? All right, so let's go back to MATLAB. So now we've typed a couple things into MATLAB. We've got all these variables over here in our workspace. We've got all this stuff on the screen. What if we want it to go away? What if we want to clear out things, kind of start fresh? We've got a couple commands that I kind of call the housekeeping tasks. So if you want to clean up your dorm room, you've got some cleaning tools. We also have some cleaning tools in MATLAB. So if I want to clear out my command window, I can use the CLC command in MATLAB. So it's just CLC. I believe that's some sort of abbreviation, clear command window, something like that. I press enter, and magic, all of that stuff goes away in the command window. That's the only thing that it gets rid of. So CLC just kind of erases the stuff that's visible in your command window. You can see you've still got your variables over here in your workspace. If you go to your command history tab, you can still see all the commands that we've done recently. They're still there. Clearing out the command window doesn't clear out that history. I don't even know. There's probably a way to clear out your command history, but it's not a super useful thing to know. So I don't even know how to do it. What happens if I accidentally clear out my command window and I didn't really want to, or I still want that thing? I can go back over to my command history. If I double click on any of these things, MATLAB will go ahead and re-execute that command, and I can see it again if I want to. So double clicking on things can bring that stuff back up. You also have the nice ability in MATLAB to recall information. So if I'm over here in my command window, I do another CLC, I make stuff go away, and I say, oh, I really wanted that thing again. I can always use my up and down arrows. So click in your command window, press the up and down arrow, and you can cycle through all your previous commands that you want to and re-execute those. So that's really helpful. For example, if you're writing some sort of calculation, so you say, y is equal to 2 times, 4 plus 10 or something like that, but you make a mistake. You meant to type 10, you only type 1, you press enter and you go, oh, that was too bad, I meant to put 10 there. What do I not have to do? I don't have to type out that whole thing again. I can press the up arrow, I can go over and edit it, add my 0, press enter, and get the right thing. So that saves you some typing. You don't have to retype big long equations again. You can just use the recall command, pull up those recent things, and execute them in MATLAB. So that's really helpful. Let's see. So MATLAB is, so far we've kind of used it as kind of a fancy calculator, right? It's not really all that impressive yet. What was MATLAB designed to do? MATLAB was designed to deal with matrices. It's called MATLAB because it's the matrix lab. So it's designed to deal with matrices. It's designed to deal with vectors. So what do I mean when I say vector, and what do I mean when I say matrix? So when I say a vector, I'm kind of meaning more of a mathematical vector. So not the vectors that you deal with in physics that have arrows and magnitude and direction. These are mathematical vectors. So a vector in MATLAB, vector is a one-dimensional array of numbers. So examples of vectors you would have, you know, A is equal to, see, 1, 3, 5, 7. So that's a vector. This is what is called a row vector, because all the numbers are lined up in a row. You can also have column vectors. So if we have B is equal to 2, 4, 6, this is a column vector because we have numbers all in one column. So vectors have one dimension. So either vectors are row vectors, where all the numbers, you read them from left to right, or they're column vectors, where all the numbers are on top of each other. So that's what a vector is. When I talk about vectors in this class, again, not talking about the arrows with magnitude and direction. We're talking about mathematical vectors with numbers in them. So it's an important kind of point of confusion for some people in this class. The other term that you're going to hear me say a lot is a matrix. So what do I mean when I say a matrix? This is a two-dimensional array of numbers. So we could have C is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Whatever numbers that we want to put inside of our matrix. So matrix, two-dimensional, rows and columns in our matrix. We can have, in MATLAB, we can have, you know, matrices that have, at minimum, 2 rows, 2 columns. That would be the smallest matrix we could have. We can have matrices that have, I don't know, millions of rows and millions of columns. MATLAB can handle all of that kind of stuff. In this class, we're going to be only talking about one-dimensional arrays or vectors and two-dimensional arrays or matrices. You can also, in MATLAB, have 3-dimensional matrices. You can have 4-dimensional matrices. You could probably, I don't know, I don't think there's a limit. So you can have complicated, really complicated matrices. In this class, we're only dealing with the vectors and the two-dimensional matrices. That's all we have to deal with. So that's some terminology to know. What else? So how do I even go about typing these into MATLAB? So now we have vectors and we have matrices. How does MATLAB handle those? So first off, what if I want to get rid of this stuff in my workspace? So we talked about the CLC command. That clears out the command window. What if I want to get rid of those variables in my workspace? I'm done with Bob and all those other things. I want to clear out my workspace, clear out those variables. I just simply type in the word clear, press enter, and voila, everything goes away in my workspace. So clear, useful, but also dangerous, right? So if you press clear, those things are gone. You're not going to get them back unless you re-execute all the commands that you used to be able to define X and Bob and all of those things that we had in the workspace. So make sure, you know, if you use clear, you're meaning to use clear, and you intended to do that. So those are kind of two commands that we're going to use all the time, clear and CLC. You'll become familiar with those. So what if we wanted to write out A, our A row vector that we have up there on the board? How do we do that in MATLAB? Well, we kind of start off the same way we would do a variable. We'd say A equals something, and now we have to tell MATLAB that that's going to be a matrix or a vector. And the way we do that, just kind of how I have it written on the board, is that we put it in square brackets. So we open up our square bracket, and now we have to type out our numbers. You can do this a couple different ways. So if you're writing a row vector like that, you can type it, you can have your 1, and you can put spaces to separate the different columns of the vector. So you can have 1 space, 3 space, 5 space, 7. If you're done with your row vector, you close your square bracket, you press enter, and MATLAB's going to print that out to the screen. MATLAB, when it prints and reports back to you that it has set the variable A equal to something, kind of loses those square brackets, but they're still separated out, so you kind of know that it looks like a vector. If you look over here in your workspace, you've got your square brackets. if we double click on that variable, we look at it in the spreadsheet kind of form, you can see that each part of our vector is in a separate box of our spreadsheet. So we've got several different ways of kind of looking at vectors or matrices in MATLAB. So there's a different way, if you don't like spaces, there's a slightly different way to write out a row vector or separate one column from another column in MATLAB. So I could have also done A is equal to square bracket 1, 3, 5, 7. No spaces. Same thing in MATLAB. So whenever you want to separate numbers one column to the next column, you can either use spaces or you can use commas. It's kind of up to you, whatever key you like best on your keyboard, I guess. So now we figured out row vectors. So row vectors have lots of different columns, all the variables in one row. We need to separate those by spaces or by commas. What if we want to create B here, our column vector? What do we have to do to tell MATLAB that I want to go skip from the first row to the second row to the third row? There's another simple syntax to do that. So if I say B is equal to, I still have to open my square bracket, and I put my first number, and instead of putting a space or a comma, I have to use a semicolon. So I say 2, semicolon, 4, semicolon, 6, close my square bracket, press enter, and MATLAB has created a column vector for me with each variable on, or each number on a separate row. So now we figured out how do we do row vectors and how do we do column vectors. So now what if I want to create my big matrix C here over here on the right? What do we think I'm going to have to do here? You want to take a guess? So I type C, I say C is equal to, and now what should I do? What do we think?
1, 2, 3, semicolon, 4, 5, 6.
Do I start with my 1, 2, 3? What else do I need to tell MATLAB that this is going to be a vector or a matrix?
Open bracket.
The square bracket, right? So we always have to remember our square bracket. That tells MATLAB, hey, there's going to be more than one number here. I'm making a vector. I'm making a matrix. Then I type my 1, 2, 3, right? So what do I separate my 1, 2, 3 by?
Semicolon.
Semicolon? Comma or space, right? After, yeah. So I say 1, 2, 3, separated by spaces. I can do a semicolon. That'll put me down on the next row, right? Then I can do 4, 5, 6, another semicolon. We can break it up. We could do 7, 8, 9, semicolon, 10, 11. We can even do space and 12. So you can get really crazy in there, right? So whatever you feel like doing, you press enter, and hopefully you have a matrix that looks kind of like mine. So what happens if we make a mistake? So what does that look like? So if I recall my C variable and say I got distracted and I only put 10 and 11 down on there in the bottom row, what's MATLAB going to do? I press enter, I left out a number, and it's angry at me again, right? So one of the biggest skills that you're going to learn, hopefully in this class, is what's called debugging. Debugging is trying to fix your errors, things you've screwed up, and try to tell MATLAB and it doesn't understand, right? So like I said, most of the time MATLAB provides us helpful errors. This is one of the, I don't know, kind of not so helpful errors, but once you figure it out, once you learn what it means, you'll always go, okay. So what is it saying? So it's saying dimensions of matrices being concatenated are not consistent. And you're going to go, what the heck is MATLAB even saying, right? Like all these words, I don't get it. So what is it meaning there? Usually this variable means that you've tried to create some sort of matrix, but you haven't given it enough numbers, or you've given it too many numbers. So on our first 3 rows, we defined 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. On our very last row, we forgot about the 12 there. So there's kind of a hole in the matrix as far as MATLAB is concerned, and it's mad about that. It likes matrices to be nice and even, no holes in them. So that's what it's trying to tell you. Same thing happens. So for example, I recall that matrix. I now remember my 12, but I get really carried away, and I want to stick another number down there. I say 13. I'm also going to get that same error because now you've tried to create something over here in the matrix that didn't exist in the other rows, so MATLAB is angry about that as well. So whenever you get that error about the dimensions and the concatenation and da-da-da-da. What does that mean? Usually one thing, you've given it too many numbers or you've not given it enough numbers in your matrix. So that's always something to keep an eye out. Remember what that error means. All right, any questions about that? Okay, so we've created variables, we've created vectors, and we've created matrices in MATLAB. So those are really, really important skills, just how do we even do things in MATLAB. So now we're going to kind of start learning some MATLAB tricks. So it's really kind of annoying. What if I gave you, 150 numbers that I wanted you to create a vector in? It's not all that efficient to type out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'd be here all day if I asked you to do that, right? So thankfully, MATLAB has some tricks to help us create matrices and vectors in really quick ways, as long as we've got numbers that kind of follow some sort of pattern. So the first trick that we have is what's called the colon operator in MATLAB. So the colon operator allows us to, create vectors or matrices with numbers that follow a pattern. So the colon operator could help us create all of these vectors and matrices that I put up here on the board. So what do we notice about A over there? What's the pattern there? Odd numbers. What's the kind of increasing value between them? 2, right? We add 1, 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 5 plus 2 is 7, right? So we've got values that are increasing by 2 every time. And so we can take advantage of that pattern when we're creating the vector, and that's how we can use the colon operator. So the colon operator follows a very specific format. You tell MATLAB 3 things separated by 2 colons. So you tell MATLAB first the start value. Then you tell MATLAB the increment. And then the last thing is the finished value. So you have to tell MATLAB that 3 pieces of information, and it can create whatever vector that you want that follows some sort of pattern. So if we look at A there, our start value is the value that's over on the left-hand side of the vector. So our start value, we would say A is equal to 1 for our start value. Then we put a colon. What's going to be our increment? What do you think? 2, because the values are increasing by 2. Really easy. Then we have to tell MATLAB the finished value, or the last value that we want at the end of our vector. So that's going to be 7, right? So colon operator, not too hard. We tell MATLAB where to start, we tell MATLAB what to increase the values by, and we tell MATLAB what to finish the values by. So that's super easy, and it will create a vector for us automatically. So let's try that out. So we can say A is equal to, and the nice thing about the colon operator is that it's designed to make vectors. So we don't have to tell MATLAB that we're going to make a vector. So I don't necessarily need the square brackets. You can do it if you want to. It makes you feel better. You can put them in there, but you don't necessarily have to. You can just say A is equal to 1 colon 2 colon 7. Press enter. Voila, I get A is 1, 3, 5, 7, right? So you can see how that become really helpful. If I ask you, if you want to create a vector that maybe has 100 numbers or 1,000 numbers in it, you don't have to type them all out. You can just use the colon operator to do that. So there's some handy tricks about the colon operator. If you want your values to increase by 1, so say I wanted to do 1, 2, 3, something like that. I don't have to tell MATLAB what the increment is. By default, it's going to do an increment of 1. So I could say, I don't know, D is equal to 1 colon 15. I press enter, and you'll see that D has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 15. So if you don't specify an increment, it's going to by default go by 1. You can also do increments by some sort of decimal number. So if I wanted to say, E is equal to, 5 colon 0.5 is my increment, colon 10. I now get increments in values of 1/2. I can also do negative increments. So I could have, F is equal to, 50, increment by -5, and then go down to 20. And you'll see that instead of having values that are increasing in value, I now have values that are decreasing in value. So that's some handy little tricks related to the colon operator. So any questions about what we've done today? Not too hard, not super exciting, I know. It's the first couple days, pretty dry, but we'll get there, I promise. It'll be a little more exciting by the end of the week, next week. So that's all we have for today. So as a reminder, homework number 1 is due next Wednesday. And then I forgot on Monday, so how I learn people's names is I take a video of you saying your first and last name, or whatever name it is that you want me to call you. And then I watch my video over and over again, and then I learn people's names. So as you are walking out the door, if you could say clearly and loudly your first and last name into my cell phone, I will record the video. I promise I won't post it on Facebook or anything like that, so it's just for me to use. But I appreciate it. All right, everybody have a good weekend.